Hi, and welcome to a new video of this MOOC. In this video, we are going to learn the main concepts about Angular roots. Thanks to Angular roots, we enable the user navigation in our applications. And user navigation happens in three cases. The first one, when the user enters a URL in the web browser address bar. The second one, when the user clicks in a link of the application. And the third one, when the user navigates using the browser's back and forward buttons. Thanks to the Angular router feature, we can handle these interactions of the user and modify the view that our application is displaying. That, as we will see later, corresponds to the template of a specific component, of course. So let's see how to configure and use roots in our application. The first thing we have to do in order to start using roots is to set the base href in the index.html file of the application. This is included by default when we create an Angular application, but it's important to check that this is actually there, because if not, the Angular navigation will not work, okay? Then we have to configure the roots we want to manage in the application module file. So the first thing is to import the needed modules and objects. We need to start using roots. In this case, is the router module and the roots object from Angular router module. And then, as you can see here, we can configure the roots we will manage in our application. And this is very easy. As you can see here, we have just to configure the path we want to handle and the component we want to render when the user navigates to this specific path. So in this case, we have configured just two paths: the index that will render the template of index component, and to-dos that will render the template of the to-dos component. Finally, in the imports array of this application component, we have to include the router module following the format you can see here in this slide, okay? We want to enable tracing and to display some information about this routing in the web browser console. We can include this enable tracing to true in the configuration. So let's see an example of how this will work in the application. Imagine that we have configured the roots as you have seen in the previous slide, and the user navigates to the to-dos path. What will happen here is that, as we have configured that this path matches to the component to-dos component, Angular will take the template of this component, in this case in todos.component.html file, and will include the HTML included here after a tag we have to define in the HTML. As you can see here, we have defined in the HTML this tag, router outlet. And what Angular will do is to put the specific template of the component after this tag. So it's very important to include this router outlet tag in the HTML, because Angular will always render its component template after this tag. So this is very easy, but of course we can configure a lot of things in order to manage complex behavior when using roots. Let's see a set of examples. Of course, in the Angular documentation, you have the full information about all these parameters and all this configuration. For instance, we can, of course, manage parameters in the URL. So in this case, we are passing to the to-do detail components the identifier of the specific to-do we want to display in the application. And this is This is managed as in other languages using a colon, and after the colon the name of the parameter. So if we, for instance, navigate to to-dos 31, this will match this route and passes to the to-do details component the value of the ID parameter. We will see in the next slide how we can access to this parameter in the component. We can also pass custom information to the component using the data parameter. So here in the data parameter we can set any information. We will and this information will be also available in the component, as we will see later. Of course, we can use redirections using the redirect to parameter of the router configuration, and we can also manage the matching strategy we want to use, as you can check with detail in the Angular documentation. But I just say here the basis that by default the matching strategy is prefix. So Angular starts checking the path, and depending on the prefix, it will render a component or another component. In this case, if we change the matching strategy to full, we will take the whole path in order to select the route we want to include. Finally, it's very common to include last route that will be used in case no one of the previous defined routes match the URL. So for instance, here we have to define a component that is the page not found component that will be rendered when the path does not match any of the previous configured routes. Okay. So how to access this information, like the parameters of the data we pass to the routes? This is possible thanks to the activated route. Activated route is a service that is automatically injected in every component that is managed using this routes feature in Angular, and that passes to the component this extra, let's say, data we can manage in the application. So for instance, if we have defined a route like the one you can see in the slide with a parameter and also with extra data, in the component that is rendered, the to-do detail component, as you can see, we can inject the activated route service, and we can here access to different data. For instance, the current URL that is being managed in the application, the data we have pasted to the application, in this case the list of to-dos string, and finally the parameters we have pasted, in this case the identifier of the to-do. The activated route has a set of properties that are observable, so we can subscribe to changes in these observables, but we can also access the current value of any parameter accessing the property snapshot, in which every property is available with the, as I said, current value of the property. Finally, in order to manage links in the application, it's very recommendable to use the router link directive that also the router module of Angular offers to us, because thanks to this we will take advantage of several features that the router feature offers to us. So in order to manage links in the application, it's better to include the router link to the anchor tags we include in our views. Okay, so that's all for this video. And see you in the next one. Bye.